So now that we understand how the test works, I'm going to move on and talk about the study that was recently published as a preprint in medRxiv. And this study was based on the EDSAB HOME study, which was a prospective epidemiological study of approximately 2,800 key workers. And it was done to look at the serology and the T cell responses to SARS-CoV-2 infection. And this study had 3 key worker cohorts in it. So the first one was a low-risk cohort. So these were people who were at lower risk of SARS-CoV-2 exposure. And this was police or fire and rescue workers. And that cohort's made up of 1,139 individuals. We then had a higher risk cohort. So these were people who, through their occupation, were at high risk of SARS-CoV-2 exposure, which is healthcare workers. And there were 1,533 individuals in this cohort. And then finally, the study had this previously PCR positive cohort, so people who previously tested positive using PCR for SARS-CoV-2 infection. And this again is healthcare workers, and that population is made up of 154 individuals. And the participants recruited into all 3 of these cohorts were tested for previous SARS-CoV-2 infection using commercially available serology tests and the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 research use only kit. So the first really exciting finding from this preprint that's available in medRxiv is that T cell responses can be detected in the majority of infected individuals. So in this study, the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 kit was able to identify T cell responses in patients who had previously tested positive using PCR. So if we look at this first graph here, we can see that we have our low-risk population and then our population of people who had previously tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 using PCR. And what we can see is that the majority of those individuals who had a previous positive PCR test result also had T cells that were responsive to the SARS-CoV-2 peptides used in the discovery test. And what we can see in this bar chart is that the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 kit was able to identify 142 out of the 154 individuals who had previously tested positive using PCR. And this is around 92.2%. So this shows that the T-cell testing is able to discriminate between previously infected individuals and people who are presumed uninfected. So the conclusion here is that the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 kit could identify the majority of SARS-CoV-2 reactive T cells in the majority of PCR positive individuals. The second finding that I want to talk about is that we could also detect T cell responses in people who were infected and were previously PCR positive, but who were seronegative in this study. So the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 test was able to identify T cell responses in a PCR positive seronegative cohort. So if we look at the previously PCR positive individuals, which was this 154, we saw that whilst the sensitivity of serology in this cohort was really high, the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 kit was actually able to identify 5.6% of individuals who tested negative using serology. And what's really interesting is that some of these seronegative individuals actually demonstrated really robust T cell responses. So the conclusion here was that the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 kit was able to identify infected individuals who were missed using serology testing. And the final bit of data that I want to talk about from this study today is that SARS-CoV-2 specific T cell responses can be detected in most seropositive individuals. So what this means is that antibody responses and T cell responses actually correlate really well. And what we saw was that seropositive individuals tend to have higher numbers of responsive T cells than those who receive negative antibody results. So this bar chart here shows that 82.66% of individuals who tested positive using one of the antibody tests in the study also generated T cell responses which could be detected using the T-Spot Discovery SARS-CoV-2 test. And what this tells us is that SARS-CoV-2 specific T cell responses correlated really well with seropositivity and could be detected using the research use only kit. So just to summarize what I've talked about today, I've discussed a little bit about the limitations of antibody testing, particularly in patients who don't generate detectable antibody responses or whose antibody responses decline over time. I've then talked a little bit about the importance of T cell testing and the idea that investigating cell-mediated immunity might provide more information about immune responses to SARS-CoV-2. I've then shown that SARS-CoV-2 specific T cells can be detected using T-spot technology. And the results of the EDSAB HOME study, which has been published as a preprint in medRxiv, show us that the T-spot discovery SARS-CoV-2 assay is capable of detecting meaningful T cell responses in the context of large clinical trials. And I think what's really reassuring is that the results of the EDSAB HOME study correspond really well with the emerging evidence in the literature about the importance of T cell testing. So to conclude, I hope what I've been able to show today is that the T cell responses could be considered as a reliable adjunct to antibody testing when we're investigating immunity to SARS-CoV-2. And I really hope that you found the new data that we've got in this preprint in medRxiv as exciting, as interesting as we have. And I would now like to open the floor for any questions. So thank you so much for listening today.